The active shooter alert came through during parent-teacher conferences, but the principal disabled the intercom and said, "We're not creating panic over a false alarm." I was sitting across from Ethan's parents when my phone vibrated on the desk. The notification banner showed a red emergency icon I'd never seen before in 8 years of teaching. Active threat detected. Shelter in place immediately. Do not evacuate. I looked up at Margaret and Louis Drummond, who were mid-sentence about their son's reading comprehension scores. They hadn't felt their phones buzz because Margaret's was in her purse and Louis had left his in the car. Through my classroom door's narrow window, I could see other teachers checking their phones in the hallway, faces going pale. The overhead speakers crackled. Principal Fisk's voice came through, that same authoritative tone he used for morning announcements. "Disregard the alert that just came through on your devices. This is a system malfunction. We are investigating the source, but I repeat, this is not a real emergency. Continue with your scheduled conferences. Do not evacuate. Do not lock down. This is a technical error, and creating panic would be irresponsible." Then the intercom went silent. Not the usual click of him signing off, but a different sound, like someone had yanked the cord from the wall. Margaret was looking at me strangely. "Is everything okay?" Her hand moved toward her purse where her phone was buried under wallet and keys. I stood up too quickly, my chair scraping against the linoleum. "I need to check something. Please wait here for just a moment." I walked to my door and opened it, stepping into the hallway where 3 other teachers were clustered together whispering. Vanessa Ortega from the art room held her phone up, showing us all the screen. The alert was still there, timestamped 6:43 p.m., with additional text below. "Gunshots reported in main building. Law enforcement notified. Secure all areas." Did Fisk really just tell us to ignore this? Dennis Huang, the algebra teacher, was scrolling through his phone frantically. "My wife just texted. She's watching the news. They're saying there's an active situation at Riverside High. That's us. That's this school. We need to lock down right now." I looked back into my classroom where the Drummonds sat waiting, trusting me to tell them what was happening. In the room next to mine, I could see Laura Pennington still conducting her conference, smiling at parents who had no idea their phones contained a warning that might save their lives. The hallway lights flickered once. Then we heard it. Pop, pop, pop. 3 distinct sounds from somewhere in the main building, maybe near the administrative offices. It was faint but unmistakable. Not fireworks, not construction, gunshots. Vanessa grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Oh my God, this is real. This is actually happening." Dennis started backing toward his classroom. "I'm locking my door. You should all do the same." He disappeared inside, and I heard his deadbolt slide into place. I went back into my classroom trying to keep my face neutral. The Drummonds looked up expectantly. "I'm sorry, but we need to end our conference early. There's a situation developing." Margaret stood up, alarm replacing her earlier confusion. "What kind of situation?" Before I could answer, her phone buzzed inside her purse. Then Lewis's buzzed in his pocket, the sound he'd just retrieved it from the car. They both pulled out their devices, and I watched their expressions change as they read the alert. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Lewis turned to me with wide eyes. "Where's the nearest exit? We can't evacuate. The alert says shelter in place." I moved to my door, locked it, and switched off the lights. "We need to hide. Now." My classroom was on the ground floor with windows facing the parking lot. Not ideal, but better than being exposed in the hallway. I pulled down the blinds while Margaret and Louis stood frozen in the center of the room. "Please get in the supply closet. Both of you. It's the safest place." I could hear my voice shaking, could feel my hands trembling as I grabbed my phone to call 911. More gunshots, closer this time. In the hallway outside, I heard running footsteps and someone screaming. The Drummonds rushed to the supply closet, squeezing themselves between boxes of construction paper and extra textbooks. I pressed 911 and waited for the call to connect. It rang 4 times before a dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? I'm a teacher at Riverside High School. We have an active shooter. Multiple shots fired. I'm locked in my classroom with 2 parents. The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. Yes, ma'am. We have multiple calls from your location. Officers are responding. Stay where you are. Keep the door locked. Do not try to confront the shooter. How many people are in your room? 3 total. Me and 2 parents. I heard more footsteps in the hallway, heavier this time. Someone was trying door handles. I could hear the metal rattling as they moved from classroom to classroom, checking which ones were locked. My doorknob turned slightly. I held my breath. The handle rattled again, more violently. Through the narrow window, I saw a shadow pass by. Then the footsteps moved on to the next door. In the supply closet, Margaret was crying softly. Louis had his arms around her, his face pressed against her shoulder. The intercom crackled back to life. Fisk's voice again, but different now. Strained. Everyone, this is Principal Fisk. I need all staff to remain calm. Law enforcement is on site. Stay in your current locations. Do not attempt to leave the building. We are handling this situation. Do not panic. The way he emphasized, do not panic, made panic surge through my chest. I could hear sirens outside now, getting louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the gaps in my blinds. The dispatcher was still on the line. Ma'am, can you tell me your exact location in the building? Room 118, ground floor, east wing. I teach 10th grade English. I could hear her typing. Okay, officers are entering the building now. Stay on the line with me. Do you know how many shooters there are? I don't know. I only heard the shots. I haven't seen anyone. More gunfire erupted, this time from multiple directions. It sounded like it was coming from above us and from the direction of the main entrance. The Drummonds gasped in the closet. The dispatcher's voice rose slightly. Ma'am, are you still safe? We have reports of law enforcement engaging with the suspect. Stay down and away from windows. I crawled under my desk, phone pressed to my ear. More footsteps in the hallway. Running. Then voices shouting. Police. Show me your hands. More gunshots, so close I could feel the sound in my chest. Glass breaking. Someone screaming. The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't Fisk. This time it was a voice I didn't recognize. Young and shaking. They're shooting at us. Oh God. They're shooting at students. Help us. Someone please help us. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. The dispatcher's voice was tense now. Ma'am, I need you to stay very quiet and remain hidden. We're getting conflicting reports about the number of suspects. Do not open your door for anyone unless you can verify they are law enforcement. She paused. Can you tell me if there are other people in nearby classrooms? I could see light under the door of room 120 across the hall. Laura's room. Yes. The room across from me has people inside. I saw her in there with parents when this started. The dispatcher relayed this information to someone else. I could hear radio chatter in the background, multiple voices talking over each other about positions and casualties and potential exits. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Are you okay? I saw the news. They're saying multiple shooters at your school. Call me. I couldn't respond. The dispatcher needed me to stay on the line, and I didn't want to risk making noise. Another text came through, this one from my principal. Stay where you are. Do not engage. Help is coming. The timestamp showed it was sent 6 minutes ago. 6 minutes since he'd told us to ignore the alert and continue our conferences. Margaret whispered from the closet. Is my son okay? Ethan's in the library for the book fair. Someone please check on the library. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know how to answer her. I had no idea what was happening in other parts of the building. For all I knew, the library was the safest place or the most dangerous. I could only pray that whoever was running the book fair had locked the doors and hidden the kids. The dispatcher heard Margaret's question. Ma'am, we have officers inside the building now. They will be checking all locations. Can you tell me how old the child is? He's 13, 8th grade. Margaret was crying harder now. Please find him. Please. Louis was trying to shush her gently, worried her voice would carry into the hallway. The dispatcher's response was carefully measured. Officers are aware of all students and staff in the building. They will do everything possible to ensure everyone's safety. It was the kind of answer that sounded reassuring but promised nothing. I heard more voices in the hallway now. Authoritative voices. Police commands. Show me your hands. Get on the ground. Face down, hands behind your back. A struggle. Something hitting the wall hard enough to make my classroom shake. Then a voice I recognized. I'm the principal. I'm Principal Fisk. Don't shoot. I'm trying to help. A different voice, stern and commanding. Sir, get down on the ground right now. Hands where I can see them. This is an active scene. Get down. I heard Fisk protesting, his voice rising with indignation. You don't understand. I was trying to prevent panic. The last thing we needed was everyone running and creating more chaos. The officer cut him off. Sir, this is your final warning. On the ground. Now. A thud. Fisk hitting the floor. The sound of handcuffs clicking. The Drummonds had heard all of this through the thin walls. Margaret's crying had turned to gasping breaths that sounded dangerously close to hyperventilation. Louis was whispering to her, trying to keep her calm, but his own voice was shaking. It's okay. We're okay. The police are here. It's going to be okay. I wished I could believe him. The dispatcher spoke again. Ma'am, I'm showing that officers have secured the East Wing. They will begin evacuating rooms shortly. When they knock on your door, they will identify themselves as law enforcement. They'll ask you to open the door and exit with your hands visible. Follow their instructions exactly. A knock on my door. Loud and authoritative. Police. Anyone inside? I looked at the Drummonds, who looked back at me with terrified eyes. The officer knocked again. Police. We're evacuating this room. I need you to unlock the door and come out with your hands up. I crawled out from under my desk and moved to the door, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door slowly. 2 officers stood there in full tactical gear, weapons drawn but pointed down. They visually cleared my room in seconds, then gestured to the Drummonds. Come out slowly. Hands where we can see them. We're evacuating the building. Margaret and Louis emerged from the closet, hands raised, faces streaked with tears. The officer closest to me spoke quickly. Follow me. Stay close. Do not run. We're moving to the west parking lot. If you hear gunfire, drop to the ground immediately. We filed into the hallway where I could see the aftermath of what had happened. Bullet holes in the walls, shattered glass, blood on the floor near the water fountain. More police everywhere, checking classrooms, leading out groups of shaking students and adults. Across the hall, Laura was being escorted out with 3 parents and a student who'd been in her room. She caught my eye, and I saw my own terror reflected back at me. We moved quickly through the hallway, past the administrative offices where I could see more police photographing something on the ground. I tried not to look but couldn't help myself. A body, covered with a sheet. I felt my stomach lurch. The officer guiding us noticed my reaction. Eyes forward. Keep moving. We turned the corner toward the exit and I saw more covered shapes on the ground. More casualties. How many people had died while Fisk insisted this was a false alarm? Outside, the parking lot was chaos. Hundreds of people, students and parents and staff, all clustered behind police tape while officers tried to organize them. Ambulances lined the street, paramedics treating injuries ranging from minor to critical. I saw a girl I recognized from my sophomore English class sitting on a stretcher with an oxygen mask, her shirt covered in blood. Near the ambulances, I spotted Fisk. He was sitting on the curb in handcuffs, talking rapidly to an officer who was taking notes. Even from here, I could see he was trying to justify his actions, gesturing with his cuffed hands as he explained something. The Drummonds immediately started searching for their son. Margaret was calling Ethan's name, pushing through the crowd while Lewis tried to keep up with her. I followed them, scanning faces for any of my students. The police had set up a reunification area where students were being matched with parents. We found Ethan there, sitting on the grass with his arms around his knees, staring at nothing. Margaret ran to him, dropping to the ground and pulling him into her arms. Louis joined them, and for a moment they just held each other and cried. I kept walking through the crowd, looking for my other students, counting familiar faces, checking them off against the mental roster I kept in my head. Some were crying, some were silent and numb, some were talking rapidly to police officers or reporters who'd shown up with cameras. I saw Dennis standing with his wife, both of them covered in dust. Vanessa was sitting in an ambulance, her arm being bandaged. Laura was talking to a detective, gesturing back toward the building. Principal Fisk was being led away by two officers now, no longer arguing but moving like a man in shock. A reporter approached me with a microphone. "Excuse me, are you a teacher here? Can you tell me what happened inside?" I looked at her camera and her eager expression and felt rage building in my chest. "We got an active shooter alert. Our principal told us to ignore it. Told us it was a false alarm. People died because he wouldn't let us lock down." The reporter's eyes widened. She gestured to her cameraman to make sure he was recording. "Can you say that again? On camera? What exactly did Principal Fisk say?" Before I could answer, a police officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us for a statement. No media right now." He guided me away from the reporter toward a command post that had been set up near the school entrance. A detective in a wrinkled suit was coordinating with other officers. When she saw me approaching, she pulled out a notebook. "You were inside during the incident?" "Yes. Room 118. I was conducting parent-teacher conferences when the alert came through." She started writing. "Tell me exactly what happened, starting from when you first became aware of the threat." I walked her through it. The alert on my phone. Fisk's announcement calling it a false alarm and telling us not to lock down. The gunshots. The footsteps in the hallway. The evacuation. She wrote everything down, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Did Principal Fisk give any reason for dismissing the alert? Did he seem aware that it was a real threat? I shook my head. He said it was a system malfunction. A technical error. He said creating panic would be irresponsible. The detective's jaw tightened. She glanced back toward where Fisk was being held. Did he make any other announcements after the initial one? Yes. After the shooting started, he came back on and told us law enforcement was on site, told us to stay in our current locations and not panic. She made a note. And between the first announcement and the second one, how much time passed? I checked my phone for the timestamp on the alert. Maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes from when he said it was a false alarm to when he admitted police were responding. The detective looked up from her notes. "Ma'am, in your professional opinion, would following his initial directive to ignore the alert and continue conferences have put people at greater risk?" "Absolutely. If I'd listened to him, I wouldn't have locked my door. I wouldn't have hidden. I would have been sitting there with my back to the door when the shooter came down the hallway. The Drummonds would have been completely exposed." She wrote this down carefully. "Are you aware of any other staff members who ignored his directive and initiated lockdown procedures?" "Yes. Dennis Huang in room 119 locked his door immediately. I think others did too. I saw lights off in several classrooms." The detective thanked me and moved on to interview the next person. I stood there in the parking lot as the sun set, watching emergency vehicles come and go. The news was reporting 3 dead, 11 wounded. One of the deceased was the shooter, shot by police in the main hallway. The other 2 were students who'd been in the library, where Margaret's son had been, though he'd survived by hiding in the staff office. The wounded included 4 students, 3 parents, 2 teachers, and a custodian who'd tried to lock down the cafeteria. By morning, the story had spread everywhere. National news picked it up. Principal calls. Active shooter alert. A false alarm. Casualties result. My interview with the reporter had gone viral. Videos of Fisk being led away in handcuffs played on loop. The next day, I was contacted by the district superintendent's office. They wanted a formal statement. I went in with Vanessa and Dennis, the 3 of us recounting what we'd witnessed. The superintendent, Dr. Patricia Vance, listened with her hands folded on her desk. When we finished, she sat back in her chair. "I want you to understand that we take this extremely seriously. Principal Fisk's actions showed catastrophic judgment. However, I need to emphasize that he was trying to prevent mass panic, which has its own risks. In his mind, he was making a decision to protect students. We'll be conducting a full investigation, but I want you to know the district stands behind our leadership. Vanessa leaned forward. Dr. Vance, with respect, he didn't protect anyone. He put us in danger. He told us to ignore a legitimate threat. People died. Dr. Vance's expression tightened. As I said, we're investigating. But I want to be clear that this was a complex situation with no perfect answers. Monday morning quarterbacking doesn't help anyone. Dennis stood up. This isn't Monday morning quarterbacking. This is Thursday afternoon accountability. We were there. We saw what happened. He chose to disable the intercom rather than let us make our own decisions. That's not leadership. That's control. The meeting ended badly, with Dr. Vance telling us we'd hear from the district soon and suggesting we speak to counselors about processing our trauma rather than making public statements. Translation: stop talking to the media. But the media kept calling. Parents were organizing. Someone started a petition demanding Fisk's termination and criminal prosecution. Within a week, it had 50,000 signatures. The teachers' union, which initially defended Fisk's decision as based on his training and experience, reversed course after the 9/11 calls were released to the public. The recordings were damning. In one call, a parent in Laura's room could be heard begging the dispatcher to send help, while gunshots echoed in the background. Tell our principal this isn't a false alarm. Tell him people are dying. Another call came from the school secretary, who'd been in the main office when the shooter entered. He's killing people. Why isn't the alarm going off? Why aren't we in lockdown? Principal Fisk said not to panic. Another call, this one from a student hiding in a bathroom. My principal won't let us lock down. He says it's fake. Please help. The timestamp on that call was 2 minutes before that student was shot. The district placed Fisk on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 weeks later, the school board voted 7-2 to terminate his employment. The 2 dissenting votes came from board members who'd been appointed by Fisk's political allies. At the hearing, Fisk defended his actions. I made a judgment call based on my experience and training. We've had 3 false alarms this year. 3 times students pulled the fire alarm to disrupt testing. Twice we've had swatting incidents where someone called in fake threats. I had to weigh the risk of a real threat against the risk of causing panic and stampede injuries. I made the best decision I could with the information I had. But the evidence showed otherwise. Security footage revealed that Fisk had received not 1 but 3 alerts before making his announcement. The first was the automated system alert that went to all staff phones. The second was a direct call from the 911 dispatcher informing him that multiple calls had been received reporting gunshots. The third was from the school resource officer who'd radioed to say he was responding to reports of an active shooter in the main building. Fisk had ignored all 3. Instead, he'd grabbed the intercom microphone and told everyone to stay calm and continue their activities. Then he'd unplugged the system so no one else could override him. The investigation also revealed something more disturbing. Fisk had been warned about security vulnerabilities months earlier. A safety audit had identified gaps in the school's emergency response protocols, including the fact that the main entrance doors didn't lock properly and the intercom system had no backup controls. Fisk had filed the audit report without acting on the recommendations, citing budget constraints. When asked about this at the termination hearing, he claimed he'd been waiting for district approval to allocate funds, but emails showed he'd never submitted a formal budget request. Criminal charges followed. The district attorney charged Fisk with 3 counts of reckless endangerment and 1 count of willful neglect of duty. The legal argument was straightforward. By dismissing a credible threat and preventing appropriate emergency response, he'd created conditions that led to preventable deaths and injuries. Fisk's attorney argued that his actions constituted poor judgment, not criminal behavior, and that charging a school administrator for split-second decisions would have a chilling effect on education leadership. The case went to trial 8 months later. I was called to testify on the 3rd day. The prosecutor walked me through my experience, from the moment the alert came through to the evacuation. She showed the jury my phone's notification log, the timestamp of Fisk's announcement, the 911 call recording. Then she asked the crucial question. Ms. Brennan, in your professional opinion as an educator with 8 years of experience, was Principal Fisk's directive to ignore the alert and continue conferences consistent with your training on emergency response? No. Our training is explicit. When an active threat alert is issued, we lock down immediately. No exceptions. No waiting for confirmation. We lock doors, turn off lights, and hide. Every second matters. The defense attorney cross-examined me. Ms. Brennan, isn't it true that schools receive false alarms regularly? That students and even community members sometimes make hoax calls? Yes. And isn't it true that evacuating or locking down unnecessarily can cause its own problems? Injuries from stampedes, panic attacks, disruption to learning? It's possible, but those problems are preferable to the alternative. The attorney pressed. Preferable to what alternative? To people dying because we waited to make sure the threat was real. The attorney tried again. But you can't know for certain that locking down earlier would have prevented casualties, can you? I met his eyes. I know that if I'd followed Principal Fisk's directive, I would have stayed at my desk with my door unlocked. I would have been exposed when the shooter came down my hallway, and I might not be here to testify. The Drummonds testified too. Margaret described the terror of being locked in the supply closet while gunshots echoed outside. Louis talked about receiving the alert on his phone and being told by the principal to disregard it. Their son Ethan, now 14, described hiding in the library office while hearing screams and gunfire through the walls. The librarian had locked the main doors immediately after seeing the alert, ignoring Fisk's announcement. That decision likely saved dozens of lives. But the library's back entrance hadn't been secured, and the shooter had entered through there. 2 students died trying to escape through that unlocked door. The parents of those 2 students testified with devastating impact. My daughter followed her training. She tried to run to safety because that's what we teach them. Run, hide, fight. But she couldn't run because the principal said there was no threat. She couldn't hide because she was told to stay in place. She fought when the shooter found her, and it wasn't enough. The mother broke down sobbing. The jury watched in silence. The father's testimony was quieter, but no less powerful. My son texted me from the library. He said the librarian wanted to lock down, but the principal said not to. He said he didn't know what to do. That was his last message to me. Medical experts testified about the injuries. A trauma surgeon described treating a 13-year-old with a gunshot wound to the abdomen. The delay in securing the building allowed the shooter to move freely for approximately 7 minutes longer than he would have if proper lockdown procedures had been initiated immediately. In active shooter situations, every minute represents a critical window for preventing casualties. The surgeon's testimony was technical but damning. Another expert, a former FBI agent specializing in active shooter response, testified about Fisk's decision-making. His choice to dismiss the alert violated every evidence-based protocol we have. The standard is immediate action. Lockdown first, ask questions later. By choosing to wait and verify, he guaranteed that people would be exposed to danger longer than necessary. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the verdict was guilty on all counts. Fisk showed no emotion as the judge read the decision. Sentencing came a month later. The judge's statement was scathing. Mr. Fisk, you were entrusted with the safety of hundreds of children and staff. When faced with credible evidence of danger, you chose to prioritize your perception of control over their lives. Your actions directly contributed to preventable deaths. While you did not pull the trigger, you created the conditions that allowed tragedy to unfold. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison and 5 years probation, with conditions including never working in education again. The civil lawsuits followed. 15 families sued the school district, seeking damages for wrongful death, negligent supervision, and emotional distress. The district settled 12 of them quickly, paying out a total of $18 million. 3 cases went to trial, including the Drummond family's suit. They weren't seeking money as much as acknowledgement. Their attorney made it clear in opening statements. This isn't about punishing the school. This is about ensuring that what happened to this family, hiding in a closet while their son faced danger, never happens to another family. It's about accountability. I testified again in the civil trial describing the same events. This time, though, the focus was different. The attorney asked about the district's response after the shooting. Did anyone from administration apologize to you? Did they acknowledge that following Fisk's directive would have put you in greater danger? No. Dr. Vance said Fisk was trying to prevent panic. She suggested we needed counseling rather than making public statements. The attorney nodded slowly. So the district's position was that you and other staff needed therapy to process your trauma, but not that their leadership needed accountability for creating that trauma in the first place? Objection was called and sustained, but the point had been made to the jury. The district's defense strategy was to blame Fisk individually, while claiming the system had worked as designed. They argued that one administrator's poor judgment didn't constitute systemic failure. Their expert witness, a school safety consultant, testified that emergency response protocols are only as effective as the people implementing them, and that no system can account for every possible human error. The plaintiff's attorney destroyed this argument on cross-examination. Sir, isn't it true that proper emergency systems include redundancy precisely to prevent single points of failure? Yes. And isn't it true that allowing a single administrator to disable an entire school's intercom system represents a single point of failure? The witness hesitated. Potentially. So by your own standards, the district's system failed. Objection. Sustained. But again, the damage was done. The jury found in favor of the Drummonds, awarding them $3.4 million in damages. More importantly, they included a recommendation in their verdict that the district implement comprehensive reforms to prevent similar incidents. The judge adopted this recommendation, ordering the district to overhaul its emergency response protocols within 6 months and to submit to annual independent audits. Dr. Vance resigned 2 weeks after the verdict. The school board issued a public apology and created a memorial fund for the victims. None of it brought back the dead or erased the trauma of survivors. I returned to teaching that fall, but not at Riverside. I couldn't walk those hallways anymore without seeing bullet holes that had been plastered over and hearing echoes of gunfire that had been silenced months ago. I took a job at a different school in a different district, starting fresh with new students who didn't know my story. But my story followed me anyway. Parents found articles. Students Googled my name. I became the teacher from that shooting. And no matter how much time passed, that label stuck. I also became an advocate. I testified before the state legislature about emergency response protocols. I spoke at teacher training conferences about the importance of following your instincts over authority during crisis situations. I told my story over and over, each retelling a small act of ensuring that Fisk's failure wouldn't be repeated. Some people called me brave. Others said I was exploiting tragedy for attention. I didn't care about either characterization. I cared about making sure that when the next teacher saw an active threat alert, they'd know that locking their door might save lives, even if their principal told them not to. 3 years after the shooting, I was invited to speak at a national education conference. The topic was crisis management and administrator accountability. I stood at a podium in front of hundreds of educators and told them about room 118, about Margaret and Louis Drummond hiding in my supply closet, about the sound of the doorknob rattling as someone checked if my door was locked. I told them about Fisk's voice on the intercom insisting everything was fine while people died, and I told them the lesson I'd learned the hardest way possible, that authority without accountability is just power, and power without wisdom is dangerous. After my talk, a woman approached me. She was young, maybe in her second or third year of teaching. She told me she'd been at a school where an administrator had told them to ignore a bomb threat because graduation rehearsal was in progress. She'd evacuated her students anyway, against direct orders. The bomb had been real. Her quick action had saved lives, but she'd been written up for insubordination. She was fired at the end of that year. I listened to her story and felt the familiar rage building in my chest. Did you sue? She shook her head. I couldn't afford a lawyer, and I was scared no other school would hire me. I gave her the name of the attorney who'd handled my testimony, pro bono work for educators who faced retaliation. Within 6 months, her case was settled and she was teaching again. Dennis Huang had left teaching entirely. The trauma of that night broke something in him, and he couldn't return to a classroom. He became an EMT instead, channeling his need to help people into emergency medicine. Vanessa stayed in education but moved to administration, determined to be the kind of leader Fisk had failed to be. She instituted mandatory quarterly emergency drills and made sure every staff member had access to override controls for the intercom system. Laura transferred to elementary education, finding that teaching younger children helped her heal in ways high school couldn't. The Drummonds divorced 2 years after the shooting. The trauma had created fractures in their marriage that they couldn't repair. Margaret moved to a different state to start over. Louis stayed in town but pulled Ethan out of public school, choosing homeschooling instead. Ethan struggled with PTSD, nightmares, and anxiety that made normal teenage life nearly impossible. Last I heard, he was working with a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery and was making progress slowly. Some wounds take years to heal, and some never fully close. Principal Fisk served 18 months before being released on good behavior. He moved to a small town in a different state where his name wasn't immediately recognized. He worked in insurance sales, no longer making decisions about other people's safety. His teaching license had been permanently revoked, his career in education over. Occasionally, he gave interviews claiming he'd been a scapegoat for systemic failures, that he'd made the best decision he could in an impossible situation, that it was easy to judge from hindsight. Each time, survivors pushed back, reminding the public that his decision had cost lives. The debate never fully resolved. Some people believed administrators deserved grace for split-second choices under pressure. Others believed that authority came with responsibility, and failure to protect those in your care deserved consequences. I fell somewhere in the middle. I believed Fisk had made a catastrophically wrong choice, but I also understood the impossible position school administrators faced. They were expected to make perfect decisions in imperfect circumstances, to balance safety with education, security with accessibility. The system set them up to fail by giving them too much power and too little training. What I couldn't forgive was his refusal to acknowledge his mistake, his insistence that he'd done nothing wrong, his inability to say, I should have listened to the alert, I should have let people protect themselves. I failed, and I'm sorry. 5 years after the shooting, Riverside High held a memorial dedication. They'd built a small garden on campus with 3 benches, each bearing the name of someone who'd died. Students planted flowers, parents gave speeches. The new principal, a woman named Dr. Julia Kemper, spoke about learning from tragedy and honoring the lost by improving safety for the living. I attended with Dennis, Vanessa, and Laura. We stood together as survivors, bound by shared trauma and the knowledge that we'd done our best in impossible circumstances. Ethan was there too, now 18 and preparing to start college. He'd written an essay about his experience that had won a national award and earned him a scholarship. He spoke at the ceremony about resilience and recovery, about learning to live with fear without letting it control him. After the ceremony, I walked through the school. Room 118 was still an English classroom, though the teacher who used it now had covered the walls with new posters and rearranged the desks. The supply closet where the Drummonds had hidden was now full of different books and supplies. The bullet holes in the hallway had been repaired and painted over. The blood had been cleaned up. The building looked normal, safe, as if nothing had ever happened there. But I knew the truth. Trauma doesn't announce itself with sirens and alarms. It lives in the quiet moments when you hear an unexpected noise and your heart races. It lives in the nightmares that wake you at 2 a.m. It lives in the hypervigilance that never quite goes away. the constant awareness of exits and threats and worst-case scenarios. I left teaching 2 years ago, not because I stopped caring about students or education, but because I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't stand in front of a classroom without calculating how I'd protect them if something happened. Couldn't hear a door slam without feeling my pulse spike. Couldn't conduct parent-teacher conferences without remembering Margaret Drummond's face as she realized her son was in danger. I moved into educational consulting instead, working with districts to improve their safety protocols. I reviewed emergency plans, conducted training sessions, and helped administrators understand that preventing panic was less important than preventing casualties. It was meaningful work, but it wasn't teaching. I missed my students, missed the moment when a difficult concept clicked, missed the relationships built over semesters and years. Last month, I received a letter from Ethan Drummond. He's now in his senior year of college, studying to become a teacher. He wrote that he'd been inspired by my testimony and my advocacy, that he wanted to be the kind of educator who put students first even when it cost him. He asked if I had any advice for someone entering the profession. I wrote back and told him the truth. Teaching is the most important work you can do, but it will ask everything of you. It will ask you to make impossible choices, to balance 100 competing needs, to protect children while preparing them for independence. And sometimes it will ask you to choose between following orders and doing what's right. When that moment comes, trust yourself, trust your training, trust your instincts, and know that the consequences of inaction can be far worse than the consequences of taking a stand. I don't know if he'll face the same situation I did. I hope not. I hope the reforms that came from our tragedy will prevent others from having to make those impossible choices. But I also know that hope isn't enough. Systems fail. Leaders make mistakes. And when they do, frontline educators are left to pick up the pieces and protect their students however they can. That's the reality of teaching in modern America, where active shooter drills are as routine as fire drills, where teachers are expected to be warriors as well as educators. It's not fair. It's not right. But it's the world we've created. And until we change it fundamentally, teachers will continue to face these moments of crisis and choice. 6 years after that parent-teacher conference night, I can still close my eyes and see every detail. The alert on my phone, Fisk's voice on the intercom, the Drummonds' terrified faces, the doorknob rattling, the blood on the hallway floor. These images are permanent, burned into my memory with the kind of clarity that only trauma provides. But I've learned to live with them, to carry them without being crushed by their weight. I honor the dead by continuing to fight for better systems, safer schools, and leaders who understand that protecting students means sometimes admitting you don't have all the answers. I honor the survivors by telling our story, ensuring that Fisk's failure becomes a cautionary tale rather than a footnote. And I honor myself by acknowledging that I did the right thing, even when authority told me otherwise. Sometimes that has to be enough.